In this video, we're going to focus on manipulating artwork a little bit more. And this has to do with taking two pieces or three pieces and what we can do with them. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my custom shapes up here, and I'm just going to create a rectangle here. I might do another rectangle that is right here. And let's do one that's inside of this one. So what you see here is I have one that overlaps and one that's inside of another. And let's go ahead and I'm going to duplicate that and just throw it over here so I have another one to work with. So when we're working with artwork, there's a lot of times where we don't want overlapping. And so it's important to kind of know what we can do to clean it up. And so I'm going to take this one right here and this, hold down Control and select this one. So I have this box and this box selected. This one is not selected at this point. So when I have these two selected, you'll see that this icon becomes available. So let me click off of that. Notice that if I click on just one, this icon isn't available. It needs two objects in order to come alive. So I have these two selected. I'm going to click this drop down right here. And notice that the options I have: trim, weld, intersect, exclude, and divide. So let's take a look at what these do. So right here on trim, if I click on trim, notice that what it does is now this piece trimmed through this one. So if I select this one and move it, notice that it no longer is a perfect square or rectangle, whatever it was. Now it's punched through that shape based on this rectangle. So if I undo it, you'll see that that comes back and that's a full shape again. So that's how you can trim something through another thing. And that's just to prevent any overlap right here. Because if you're doing vinyl or you're doing even embroidery for that matter, you might not want that big overlap there. That's how you get rid of it. So now I'm going to select these two again. So they're both selected. This one is not selected at this point. You can see that right here. That would be this piece. So it's not highlighted. If I come over here, now I can choose weld. So if I click on weld, look what it does. It now has turned those two pieces into one piece. Now, this would be a great time for me to show you one other tool. So I'm going to choose to select both of these. And the one that's right next to it is called combine. And combine is something that we use to cut one object into another. But what happens if you have things that are kind of outside of each other? They might touch, but they're not, one isn't completely inside of another. Watch what happens. If I hit combine, now you'll see that in the sequence view, it's showing this as one object, meaning it's one piece. It's not separate at this point. It's combined those two together. But what you notice here is that it didn't punch it through right here. And that's because the combine tool won't do that on things unless they are one's completely inside of another. So if you were going to go cut this out, if you just selected those two and combined them and thought you were going to go cut it out, because it can be deceiving. Because if I hit the fill tool, you can see that it kind of does that right there. It'll let you know that it's not one solid piece. But you might try to use that tool and say, what's going on? Well, you're not supposed to use combine for objects like this that just touch each other. Instead, you need it to be using the weld tool like we used previously. So let me undo this a couple times until I see that in the sequence view that it becomes two objects. So you can see I have to go back a ways. So now it's two different objects again. So I'll select one and then the other by holding down Control. And now I'll go to weld, and you'll see that that creates the one object that I really wanted. Okay, so it's just important to understand the difference between those two. So I'm going to hold down Control again, have these two selected. Let me come up here. The next thing is intersect, and the icon right here kind of shows you what it's going to do. It's going to actually get rid of everything around the intersecting point. And so what that means is where it intersects is what it's going to leave. Everything else is going to go away. So let me click that icon so you can see what happens here. So you see that it just left the area that's intersected between the two. See how that is? It left this intersection piece, got rid of all the other lines around it. It's important to know how these tools work because this is actually how you create your own shapes a lot of times. And so let's go back into here and let's go to exclude. Exclude is the opposite of intersect. So instead of leaving the area that where the two intersect, it's going to delete the area where they intersect. So let's go to exclude. And you don't really see anything different here, right? Until you maybe fill it with color, and then you notice that it actually is, it took that intersecting area out. So it's it's a pretty cool little editing features that you have. Let's go ahead and select these two again. Let's come over here and let's take a look at divide. Divide is a newer tool to Floriani software, just like exclude is. Divide is, I think, a really cool feature because a lot of times if you wanted this to be one color right here, this area to be another, and then this one to be a different color, it's very difficult to do. You would have to have three different objects. So I just created two that overlapped, and now if I hit divide, now watch what happens. I can click and drag this piece. I can click and drag this piece, and I still have this piece. So I can actually change the color. It's created three objects out of two. So anywhere that there is area that is touched on each side, it's going to make it its own object. So I don't know if that makes sense, but just play around with it. You'll see how that works. So now let's see what happens if I choose all three of these. Okay. You can see that this divide is active, but if I try to trim, you're going to see that it doesn't do everything you thought it would because it didn't trim that piece out. Okay. So trim is usually done between two objects. So if I wanted this to all become one piece, this part trimmed out, this one punched through this, I'm going to need to take these two first and combine them. And you can see that that just punched the one through the other. If I fill it, you can see that it punched it through. And you can see that right here. And if I go back out of this, you'll see how that works. And then now if I bring it up and I can trim it, or I can do it I could have done it the opposite way too. Sometimes you'll get things that just don't look right, but in this case you'll see it did trim it through, but I still had this one here. And you just have to kind of play with it and move some things around if you still see that line right there, and just see if there's another piece that's behind it. But you just have to know that you have to work with sometimes one tool at a time or one feature at a time. And so let's take a look at this one where we know that it's cut through the other. If I fill it with color again, you can see that it is one object here. If you want to take out a hole that's punched through something, you can do that in the software. It's not difficult to do. All you do is come up here and you choose break apart. And if I break it apart, voila, now I have two separate pieces. If I go back here, I could change the color of one, and you'll notice that it's actually behind. The smaller piece is actually behind it, but you can see that I do have two colors. I can move the one so that now it'll show up on top, and you'll see that it's not punched through. That I have two separate objects. If I wanted to combine them back together, one thing to keep in mind, it's going to make it one piece. So in doing that, it's going to change it to be the color of one of the two objects. Okay. So let me get combine, and you'll see that it punched it through. And now I just have the one color object. And that's just kind of how it works. So working with artwork and manipulating the shapes, it's very important to know how the tools work, how trim works, how you have to, in order to trim something, you have to have two things selected. It's just important to know how to use the different tools, to select them and what they do. And if I want to combine it, I can combine it, but that wouldn't be the smart thing to do in this case, because one's not completely inside of the other, as we saw before. In working with this, there is another tool that's been added to the software that allows you to do some pretty cool stuff too. It's kind of expanding on this, what we've talked about, and it's pretty cool how this thing works. And hopefully this will be a good shapes to work with here. But I just want to show you something. If you want to make your own shape, like let's say that you really wanted something that was shaped like this, you could use a triangle, these other tools, and arrange them in a way that gives you the shape that you're looking for. And then you have this smart fill tool, and it only works with artwork. So I can come in here and I can click in this area, and it's going to fill in. It's going to notice all these lines, and it's going to only fill in the area where it touches something. So if I come into this one, I can click right here, and you can see that right here, it's not really doing what I need it to do. If I click right here, it's going to fill it in. It's going to fill in partially there. There are some things about this that aren't perfected yet, but this, if you're only working with like two different objects, it's really kind of a nice feature to use. So let me just show you what I mean by that. I'm going to make a circle. I'm going to hold down Control so it's a perfect circle. I'm going to select it, and I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to put one right here. If you're looking to create this shape right here, sometimes it can be kind of difficult, but if you create two circles and you line them up together, you can see that you can get that shape. Now I can come to the Smart Fill tool, and I can click right here, and now I've just created the shape that I want. I used two circles to create a shape that I was trying to get. And that is what this tool allows you to do, because I could have come in and drawn that using the line tool, but it wouldn't have been as easy as just creating two circles to get that shape that is very, very clean. Okay, so you can use that Smart Fill tool to create shapes that you want. So you just have to like use your imagination and say, okay, what two shapes can I use that will give me the overall shape that I want? So like in this case, if I wanted this shape, I just created it by using this hexagon and the circle. So just wanted to point that out. Those are different tools that you have to work with. Again, you'll want to play around with it, learning how to use trim, combine, break apart, all those different things. That's really all there is to creating shapes and editing them, is just knowing what tools are available and practicing on using them. So I hope that this section was really helpful to you, and you might want to refer to it. Make sure you practice using the custom shapes. Bring in the custom shapes, manipulate them, use the line artwork tool, all the different things that you can do to create shapes and edit them. You need to make sure you're practicing.